Our scripture today is from Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. At that time, the Roman Emperor Augustus decreed that a census should be taken throughout the Roman Empire. This was the first census taken when Quirinius was governor of Syria. All returned to their own ancestral towns to register for the census. And because Joseph was a descendant of King David, he had to go to Bethlehem in Judea, David's ancient home. He traveled there from the village of Nazareth in Galilee. He took with him Mary, his fiancée, who now was obviously pregnant. And while they were there, the time came for her baby to be born. She gave birth to her first child, a son. She wrapped him snugly in strips of cloth and laid him in a manger because there was no lodging available for them. Let's pray. God, thank you for your word. God, may we hear your words today. Amen. Well, for years now, whenever Christmas pageants were talked about in a certain little town in the Midwest, and no, it's not Marion, someone is sure to mention the name of Wallace Perling, or Wally. Wally's performance in one annual production of the Nativity play has slipped into the realm of legend. But the old-timers who were in the audience that night never tire of recalling exactly what happened. Wally was 9 that year and in the second grade, though he could have been in the fourth. Most people in town knew that he had difficulty in keeping up. He was big and clumsy, slow in movement and mind. Still, Wally was well liked by the other children in his class, and all of them were smaller than he, though the boys had trouble hiding their irritation if the uncoordinated Wally asked to play ball with them. Most often, they'd find a way to keep him off the field, but Wally would hang around anyway, not sulking, just hoping. He was always a helpful boy, a willing and smiling one, and the natural protector, paradoxically, of the underdog. Sometimes, if the older boys chased the younger ones away, he would always be the Wally who'd say, "Can't they stay? They're no bother." Well, Wally fancied the idea of being a shepherd with a flute in the Christmas pageant that year, but the play's director, Miss Lombard, assigned him to a more important role. After all, she reasoned, the innkeeper did not have many lines, and Wally's size would make his refusal of lodging to Joseph more forceful. And so it happened that the usual large partisan audience gathered for the town's Yuletide extravaganza of the staff and crutches of beards and crowns and halos and the whole stage full of squeaky voices, and no one on stage or off was more caught up in the magic of the night than Wally Perling. They said later that he stood in the wings and watched the performance with such fascination that from time to time, Miss Lombard had to make sure he didn't wander onto the stage before his cue. Then the time came when Joseph appeared slowly, tenderly guiding Mary to the door of the inn. Joseph knocked hard on the wooden door set in the painted backdrop. Wally, the innkeeper, was there, waiting. "What do you want?" Wally said, swinging the door open with a brusque gesture. "We seek lodging." "Seek it elsewhere." Wally looked straight ahead, but spoke vigorously. "The inn is filled." "Sir, we have asked everywhere and everyone in vain. We have traveled far, and we are very weary." "There's no room for you in this inn." Wally looked properly stern. "Please, good innkeeper, this is my wife, Mary. She is heavy with child and needs a place to rest. Surely you must have some small corner for her. She's so tired." Now, for the first time, the innkeeper relaxed his stiff stance and looked down at Mary. With that, there was a long pause, long enough to make the audience a bit tense with embarrassment. "No, be gone," the prompter whispered from the wings. So Wally repeated, "No, be gone." Joseph sadly placed his arm around Mary, and Mary laid her head upon his shoulders. and the two of them started to move away. The innkeeper did not return inside the inn. The innkeeper did not return inside his inn, however. Wally stood there in the doorway, watching the forlorn couple. His mouth was open, his brow creased with concern, his eyes filling unmistakably with tears. "Don't go, Joseph!" Wally called out. "Bring Mary back!" And Wallace Perling's face grew into a bright smile. "You can have my room!" Some people in town thought that the pageant was completely ruined. Yet there were others, many, many others, who considered it the most Christmas of all Christmas pageants they had ever seen. I think Wally gets the story of Christmas, doesn't he? Well, we've heard this story 1,000 times. Some of you have heard it a lot more, even than me. But as you read this story, the humble beginning of Jesus is, well, very humbling. Jesus was born into poverty, not privilege. He was born into humility, not power. He was born into obscurity, not prominence. And what's amazing about all of this is that all of it was done on purpose. Jesus' humble beginnings aren't for the sake of a beautiful Hallmark story. Do you know Hallmark is the #1 channel during the Christmas holidays? But Jesus' humble beginnings aren't for the sake of a beautiful Hallmark story. They serve notice to everyone on earth that Jesus' way of doing things is completely different than anything that had ever been seen before. You see, God chose Joseph, not someone like Caesar, someone of royalty. He didn't choose what would consider to be an important man, a man well known around the world like Caesar, or anyone else that had any kind of magnitude. He chose a carpenter who only the village people knew. Joseph and Mary were nobodies, but Joseph and Mary were focused. Their focus was on the will of God and not their own. They even obeyed Caesar. Caesar was just a part of the story, but not the focus of the story. And Caesar, as we read, issues a decree that a census should be taken, and Joseph and Mary had to walk for weeks to get to their hometown. Jesus was not born in comfort or in power or in authority. Jesus did not inherit any power from his family. His family was no one special. And Jesus had a very difficult beginning to his life. And Joseph and Mary did their best they could with the resources they had and gave Jesus the best start in life they could give him. What's funny is that Jesus was not born into comfort, but he is our comforter. Jesus was not born into power, but God gave him the power to be the most powerful man on earth. Jesus was not born to a position of authority, but God gave him the authority to heal blind, lame, deaf, and diseased people. This reminds us that Jesus' kingship, this king, is completely different than any earthly ruler. See, God's purpose for Jesus was not to be an earthly ruler. And as you read through the Old and New Testament, you discover the earthly rulers constantly failed. There were a few that succeeded, but many of them failed, and very few of them rarely obeyed God, and none of them, no king, not even King David, the one who's revered above all kings, not even King David could change the hearts of man. God's purpose for Jesus, as we know, and if you don't know, God's purpose for Jesus was to be the ruler of our hearts. Now, think about it. We want him to change what's going on around the world, don't we? I mean, some of us have been our prayer, oh, God, do something in this world. God, change, get rid of ISIS. Oh, God, shut Trump up. Would you please shut him up? Come on, God, do us a favor. I mean, we all probably, some of you have maybe not prayed that prayer, but you thought it has ran into your hearts, But God didn't come and send his son to change anything that's going on earth other than change our hearts. That's really important to know, because a lot of times we spend a lot of time and energy asking God to change things in our world, to make it better. But do you know what he really needs? He needs for us to allow him to change our heart. That's why he came as a babe in the manger, so we wouldn't get all caught up in the money and power and all these things that we get caught up in. I know God is concerned with what's going on in the world, but he's far more concerned when he knows when he has your heart, and he knows when your heart has been changed. Guess what changes? The world. But we want God to do it all in one shot. Well, folks, he's not going to do it. At least I haven't seen it all in one shot. He's going to start in your heart. God's purpose for Jesus was to be the ruler of our hearts. And we want him to change, like I said, what's going on around us. We want him to change our circumstances. We want him to change everything about this world. But we don't want him to change. And maybe I'm wrong. And I see this a lot. But we really don't want him to change our heart, do we? Come on now. Do we really want him to change our heart? Or do we like where we're at and what we're doing? Or do we really want God to change what's going on inside of us? You know, boy, God had to change some selfishness in me. God had to change the old my way or no way in me. And just because I became a believer and followed Christ didn't mean those things changed automatically. I had to allow Jesus to change those things in my heart. I had to allow Jesus to change the attitude of my mind and heart put together. But that's what he wants to change, is our hearts. You know, another part about this story, God chose Jesus to be born in the small town of Bethlehem and not Rome. That's important. Bethlehem was not a wealthy or an exciting town. You know, you could probably equate Marion with that. No one moves to Marion, do they, other than for a job? No one moved to Bethlehem. No one went there on purpose. Bethlehem was not a wealthy or exciting town. It definitely wasn't a town of influence. And all the powerful and all the influential people and significant people were born in Rome, and they were Roman. Jesus was not born into social prominence or exceptional wealth, but he was the most influential man in the history of mankind. And Jesus' influence and significance didn't come from his background. His influence and significance came from his heavenly Father. And Jesus' focus was not on himself and how important he was and that him being God's son, but his focus was on what? It was on other people. And, you know, Matthew 20:28 says, "For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many." You know, the third part of this story, you know, God chose Jesus to be born in a manger and not on a throne or not a royal birth. He didn't have a royal birth. He was not powerful as a baby. He was born in a lowly way. He was born in a stable outdoors. That was done on purpose. You see, God didn't want his son to be just another earthly king. He needed a king that was willing to die on a cross for his subjects. What other king has ever done that? What president, what leader gave himself to a cross and died for the sake of his people? Well, there's only been one, and his name is Jesus. God didn't want just another earthly king. And what's amazing about all this is that God is in control this whole time. You know, Mary and Joseph, who are the main characters in this story, chose to be obedient. I'm sure they wouldn't have chosen a manger to put their firstborn in. I'm sure they wouldn't have chosen a week-long donkey ride while being nearly 9 months pregnant. I'm pretty sure they didn't want, the surroundings that they were in. But those are the choices they didn't make. What they did choose to do, they choose to be obedient no matter what life was thrown, what kind of life was thrown at them. And things didn't go exactly the way they planned, but they chose to be obedient, and they chose to trust what God was telling them was true. And what I've learned is our choices don't necessarily define us, but they do direct us, don't they? Our choices are made. Our choices are made either based on pride, which is about us, or our choices are based on humility, which is about other people. That's really the two choices we make every single day. Either we make choices out of pride or out of humility. And in this story, God was and is very intentional about everything he does and says. And Mary and Joseph, through all of that, chose to be obedient, even when it didn't make sense. Have you gone through things in your life that haven't made sense? Yes. Have you walked through times in your life that you said, oh, bring on some more of that? Hopefully not. No, the things came their way, but in the midst of all of that, they had chosen to be obedient. They had heard, angel came to them, the story, angel came to them, hey, you're going to have a baby named Jesus, and they heard the whole story, and folks, they were there. They didn't get to read the story. They are the story. And in the midst of that story, that's what makes it so amazing. Through all of that, through all the things thrown at them, all the circumstances that came their way, they chose to be obedient. And they did, it chose to listen to God and chose to believe that what he was telling them was true. And as you look at this story and you look at Mary and Joseph, there's an ongoing theme throughout this whole story. Jesus was born in a manger, not on a throne. Jesus was born to a commoner, not royalty. Jesus was born to poverty and not riches. Jesus spoke about selling everything you have and giving it to the poor. Jesus said the first will be last and the last will be first. Folks, he was born in a manger on purpose. Joseph and Mary were his parents on purpose. Being born in the little town of Bethlehem was on purpose. Everything that God does is intentional. Everything going on in your life. Everything going on in your life. Everything that God does in your life is intentional. The way he designed you was on purpose. He designed me this way. Woo! And I'm excited about that. He designed my height and my stature. He designed my bald head. He designed my eyes going out at the age of 40. True story, I'll tell you that one. He designed every single part of me. He designed my personality. So some of you, that might not be good, but he did. But the way he designed you was on purpose. The parents you have had was on purpose. I didn't get to choose my mom and dad. How many of you here got to choose their mom and dad? No, none of us got to choose who our mom and dad was. No, they were given to you on purpose. The spouse you have was given to you was on purpose. The circumstances you're walking through or have walked through, good or bad, are on purpose. Even your bad choices you make or have made are on purpose. How do you know that? Well, Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes everything. Last time I heard everything is what percentage point? 100%. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. Folks, God is intentional with everything he does. His intention is to work everything in your life for his good purpose. He wants the good, he wants the bad, and he wants the ugly. Folks, we know that. If you haven't heard it, well, take this. Nothing that has happened in your life surprises God. Your bad choices don't even surprise him. He will use those choices for his purpose if we will just humble ourselves. He is the one, folks, who gives us purpose. He is the one who gives us purpose. It's not our job. It's not our family. It's not whatever you think it is. It's not our money. That is not our purpose. Wow. He is the one who gives us purpose. And only when we humble ourselves do we find that purpose. And like I shared last week, I really wanted to be a college athlete. I really wanted to be one. But I had some limitations. I could have pouted about my limitations, but I chose instead to be the best basketball manager for Anderson University. You know what the best part was? While they were sweating, busting their butts, I got the same perks they did. That was awesome. All I did was pack their bag and wash their clothes and film their games and provided comedy during their games, during their film sessions, because everything I said during the game was recorded. So they had a good laugh as well. But I was the best at it. What was even better is that I remember beating the coach, and I remember beating their best shooter and horse. How cool is that? I couldn't make the team, but I showed them what I could do. But I remember that. I remember looking at the sign on the board saying they need a basketball manager. I just had to be willing to humble myself and recognize the opportunity. See, God has a purpose for everything you do, every decision you make, every choice you make. He has a purpose for the way he designed. He has a purpose for everything in your life. Every choice that you are faced with, there's a purpose. God, and we know God says through the scriptures, God's purposes are higher than my purposes. God's thoughts are higher than my thoughts. God's ways of doing things is higher than my way of doing things. Jesus went from a manger, which is the most humbling surroundings. He went from this manger, and only God could turn this most humble circumstance to be born into an event that we still celebrate 200 years later. And do you know, because of Jesus' birth, what once was a pagan holiday that was celebrated at the beginning of the winter solstice, which is December 20th for us, it was turned to a Christian holiday that celebrates the birth of a baby in a manger. Folks, only God could do that. Only God could do that, turn a pagan holiday into celebration of a birth of a baby. And then God concludes Jesus' life on earth by letting him die the most humiliating death on a cross. You see the thing going on here? Everything God did, everything that he did was in direct opposition to the culture and the way we think things should go, right? He sent shepherds, who we learned last week, nobody liked, and you could leave them for dead. He sent shepherds out to tell others about his verse. Wise men came and humbled themselves and bowed down in front of a baby and gave him the most extravagant a gift fit for a king. And I don't believe any of us would have written a script like that. We wouldn't have put him in the manger, would we? How many of you would have put him in the manger? Now, none of us would have put him in the manger. But like Wally, all of us would say, he could have my room. Wouldn't we? If we were there, you better, if you're a Christ follower. Yes, you can have my room. And none of us in here would have written the script of our lives the way it's been written, am I right? We would leave out the hard times, we would leave out the tragedies, we would leave out the bad choices, and we would get rid of all the negative things that have happened to us, wouldn't we? If we were to write our own script, would we have not get rid of all that stuff? In other words, our life has not gone the way we planned in our head, has it? Has anybody's life gone the way you planned it in your head? Anybody? Come on now. No, I didn't want my dad to die. I didn't want my mom to die. I didn't want my oldest brother to die. I didn't want my 2 grandmas to die. No way, I wanted them to live forever. I didn't want to make some stupid choices that would, ruin future choices. No, we'd write the script a whole different way, My wife wanted Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise, and she got me. Now, didn't she do good? She did way better. She made the right choice. I'm sorry, dear. I should have warned you there. Yeah. But she made the right choice. God knew I needed her. And God knew she needed me. And we've helped each other grow, mature in our relationship with Him. That's what marriage is about. That's why we needed each other. Going through all the hurt and the pain before I met her was worth it all. Did I understand it at the time? No. But looking back on it, God was in control the whole time. God's way is higher than my way. And everything about what God has done in my life, as I look and reflect on it, was very intentional. He sent me the best person in the world to love me. See, everything about what God does is intentional. God picked 2 humble peasants. God provided a manger. God sent shepherds to be the first witnesses for the most important event in the history of mankind. They're the first one to talk about it. And God is trying to convince each one of us that His kingdom is in direct opposition of this earthly kingdom. None of what He does makes sense on this earth, does it? Which reminds us that the kingdom Jesus is king over has nothing to do with this world. God didn't want Him to be king over an earthly kingdom, or He would have done that. And we know He wants to be the king and rulers of our what? Hearts. That's what He wants to be king over. But will we humble ourselves and give Him our room? Will we humble ourselves and give Him our room by trusting Him with the things going on in our life, even though they don't make sense? Will we humble ourselves and give Him our room by trusting Him that everything going in our life right now is intentional? Will we humble ourselves and give Him our room by trusting Him that will use every choice we make, good, bad, and ugly, and work it for His purposes? Will we humble ourselves and allow God to do that? This is where God is amazing. He says that choice is up to you.